Micah, at 68, had always prided himself on his health. He'd been the kind of man who enjoyed long morning walks, his plate always full of greens, and his weekends spent cooking for his family. The faint silvering of his hair, the lines around his eyes, they were all signs of a life well lived. Yet, something had begun to change, something that couldn't be ignored. It wasn't obvious at first, just a little extra tiredness here and there, a memory lapse or two, but it wasn't long before it began to feel like more. One afternoon, Micah was sitting with his daughter, Sarah, when she asked him a simple question. "Dad, did you take your medication today?" It was a question he'd never needed to hear before, not in all his years of good health. But that day, as he stared at her, the feeling of fog crept in. He couldn't remember, not just his medication, but the task he'd just completed moments ago. The little things. It felt like his mind was slowing down, and it scared him. His daughter was worried too. She'd seen it, those little slips, the forgotten words, the tiredness. It was subtle, but it was there. The next week, Micah visited his doctor. Dr. Reynolds had been his family physician for years, someone Micah trusted implicitly. But that day, as the doctor ran some tests and asked questions, the diagnosis hit him like a bolt of lightning. It wasn't anything concrete at first, just the beginnings of cognitive decline. Nothing official, but enough to make Micah pause. Enough to make him ask himself, what's going wrong? Micah's heart sank. For the first time, he saw the door to his own future cracked open in a way he wasn't ready for. He'd always believed he'd be the exception, the man who could grow older and remain sharp, energetic, and independent. But suddenly that seemed uncertain. And just as the fear began to settle in, another thought bubbled up. Was it something he'd been doing? Something he'd been eating? As the days passed, Micah couldn't shake that question. He'd been eating the same foods for years, but maybe there were hidden risks he didn't know about. He'd always heard how good fish was for you. Heart healthy, brain boosting, the perfect meal for a man who wanted to stay sharp. But what if the fish he'd loved for so long had started doing more harm than good? What if it was contributing to the very symptoms he was noticing? He thought back to his meals, those warm evenings spent grilling fish, sprinkling a bit of salt and lemon on top, the satisfying sizzle as it hit the hot grill. It was a tradition in his family, passed down from his parents and grandparents. Fish was always on the menu for special occasions, a symbol of celebration and health. But now, as he looked back on it, he couldn't help but wonder if those same fish, those beloved, familiar choices, were doing him harm. Micah wasn't one to panic. He wasn't about to throw away everything he'd done in his life, but something had to change. He began to research, diving into articles and asking Dr. Reynolds questions. As he dug deeper, the reality became clear. Some of the most common fish he'd been eating, the ones he'd trusted, were not as healthy as he had once thought. It was startling to learn how much mercury certain fish contained, a toxin that could slowly damage the brain and nervous system. He had always enjoyed king mackerel and swordfish, thinking they were good sources of protein and omega-3s. But these fish, so rich in flavor, were also rich in mercury. Micah had no idea, but as he learned more, the dots started connecting. His occasional memory lapses, the brain fog, the tiredness, it all began to make sense. The mercury could be affecting him silently, day by day. It wasn't just the king mackerel or the swordfish. As Micah learned more, he realized that tilefish, farmed salmon, even the seemingly innocent catfish could carry toxins, heavy metals, and chemicals that were making his body work harder than it needed to. The more he uncovered, the more concerned he became. He thought back to those moments when he felt tired for no reason or struggled to remember things he'd once known easily. Could this be connected to what I've been eating? It wasn't just one or two fish, it was the cumulative effect of years of consuming seafood that wasn't as healthy as he'd believed. But Micah wasn't ready to give up on fish entirely. No, he loved the taste, the tradition, the connection to his past. Instead, he decided to make smarter choices. He began to look for safer alternatives, fish that were lower in mercury and full of the nutrients he still needed. He discovered wild-caught salmon, sardines, and rainbow trout, fish that offered the same health benefits without the hidden dangers. Micah was determined to take control of his health again, to protect himself from the toxins that had slowly built up over the years. He began making small changes, choosing fish that was cleaner and safer for his aging body. With each step, he felt a renewed sense of hope. He wasn't alone in this. There were others just like him who had unknowingly eaten the wrong kinds of fish. But now, armed with knowledge, Micah was making better choices, not just for his own health, but for the health of his family too. He started talking to his children, explaining what he'd learned, encouraging them to make smarter choices for their kids. He was determined to protect not just his own future, but the future of the ones he loved. In the weeks that followed, Micah noticed a shift. It wasn't immediate, but the fog in his mind started to lift. He was feeling more alert, more energetic. The tiredness that had once crept in after a simple day of work began to fade. The memory lapses were fewer and fewer, and his mind felt clearer. It wasn't perfect, but it was progress. As he sat with Sarah again, sharing another meal, this time grilled wild-caught salmon, a healthier choice, he smiled. There was no magic cure, no quick fix. But through small, intentional changes, he had taken his health back into his own hands. He wasn't just managing his aging, he was thriving. And that, to him, was enough. The journey wasn't over, but Micah felt stronger, more empowered than he had in a long time. He had learned the importance of what he put on his plate, how food could either heal or harm. But most of all, he learned that change, even small change, could make all the difference. And with that knowledge, he felt ready to face whatever came next. Micah had always considered himself lucky when it came to his health. At 68, he had managed to avoid many of the ailments that seemed to plague others his age. He enjoyed long walks through his neighborhood, the cool breeze on his face, and the rhythm of his steps helping him clear his mind. His diet was solid, or so he thought, plenty of fruits and vegetables, whole grains, and lean proteins, and most importantly, fish. The grilled salmon or swordfish he had for dinner every weekend had become a tradition, a meal that symbolized good health and vitality. He prided himself on making good food choices and keeping his body in shape, never letting age hold him back. But in the last few months, something felt different. At first, it was nothing too alarming. Micah noticed that after his usual walk, he felt more drained than he used to. He couldn't quite put his finger on it, but there was a heaviness in his bones, as if the energy he once had was slipping away a little more each day. The mornings weren't as easy as they had been. He found himself struggling to get out of bed, needing an extra cup of coffee to feel awake. He wrote it off as a minor inconvenience, something that was just a part of getting older. But then came the forgetfulness. It started small, misplacing his keys or forgetting an appointment. At first, he chuckled at himself, thinking it was just the busyness of life catching up with him. But soon it escalated. One evening, he couldn't remember if he'd taken his medication. It was a simple question, something he'd never forgotten in the past. But now it felt like there was a fog in his mind that kept clouding his thoughts. His memory, once sharp and reliable, began to feel unreliable. He found himself staring at the calendar, trying to recall appointments he had just made days before. The real turning point came when he was sitting at the dinner table with his daughter, Sarah. She was asking about his health, as she often did during their weekly family dinners. Micah, sensing the growing concern in her voice, tried to brush off his fatigue. "Just a little tired, that's all. You know, getting older," he said with a smile. But Sarah wasn't convinced. "Dad, did you take your medication today?" she asked gently. Micah froze. The question hit him in a way he hadn't expected. He didn't remember. For a moment, he felt disoriented. It wasn't just the medication, it was everything. He hadn't been paying attention to how much his mind had been slipping lately. That's when the realization hit him. Something wasn't right. He had always been proud of his mental clarity, the way he could quickly recall names, dates, and details without effort. But now that sharpness was fading, replaced by a slow, creeping fog. After Sarah's concern, Micah felt the weight of it. He couldn't just ignore these signs anymore. This wasn't just about fatigue or aging, it was something deeper, something that required attention. He'd always believed that as long as he took care of his body, the rest would follow. But now, he wasn't so sure. Was this just part of getting older, or was something else going on? The next morning, Micah made an appointment with his longtime doctor, Dr. Reynolds. Dr. Reynolds had always been there for him, guiding him through his health decisions, offering advice, and never sugarcoating the truth. Micah trusted him, and it was time to face the facts. His symptoms weren't just a sign of aging, something else was at play. The more Micah thought about it, the more questions came to mind. Could the fish he'd been eating so regularly, his beloved salmon and swordfish, be contributing to these symptoms? Micah had always known that fish was healthy. It was the foundation of many of his meals, something he'd believed would keep him strong and sharp for years to come. But now, as he reflected on the past few months, he wondered if something was hidden beneath the surface of those meals. What if the very foods he trusted were doing more harm than good? The questions swirled in his mind, and he couldn't help but wonder if he had been wrong about what he thought was healthy. He was determined to find out more, but for now, he had to face the doctor. When the day came, Micah sat in the examination room, nervously drumming his fingers on the armrest. Dr. Reynolds came in, greeted him with a warm smile, and listened as Micah explained what had been going on. The doctor ran a series of tests, and as the minutes passed, Micah could feel his anxiety building. What if this was the beginning of something irreversible? When Dr. Reynolds returned with the results, Micah sat up straight, preparing for whatever news would come. "Micah," the doctor began, "your symptoms are concerning, but it's not as bad as we feared." The words hit Micah harder than he expected. Not as bad as we feared. He had no idea what that meant, but Dr. Reynolds explained that these were early signs of cognitive decline. "It's not a diagnosis yet," he assured him, "but we need to start paying attention. You've been noticing some forgetfulness, fatigue, and difficulty concentrating, and it's important to address it now before it progresses further." Micah's heart sank. His world tilted, and the floor seemed to shift beneath him. Cognitive decline? He had always prided himself on being sharp and capable. The thought of losing his sense of self, was terrifying. But even in the face of this news, he knew he couldn't give up. He had to take control of his health again, even if it meant facing uncomfortable truths. As he left the doctor's office, Micah felt a mix of emotions: fear, uncertainty, and confusion. What was the next step? What could he do to protect himself from this decline? But more than anything, he had a nagging thought in the back of his mind. Could his diet, the very thing he had believed was helping him stay healthy, be the source of the problem? It wasn't long before Micah's mind started racing. He couldn't shake the thought that something in his meals, his beloved fish, wasn't as healthy as he'd been led to believe. It was a food he had trusted, enjoyed, and served to his family for years. But now, the possibility that it could be contributing to his cognitive issues was something he couldn't ignore. The next day, he began to dig deeper. He started researching the types of fish he had been eating. Salmon, swordfish, king mackerel, those had all been his favorites. But he soon discovered that some of the fish he had enjoyed for years were high in mercury, a toxin that could cause long-term damage to the brain and nervous system, especially in older adults. Micah's heart sank as he realized that these foods, which he had assumed were healthy, might be silently harming him. Micah sat back in his chair, a flood of emotions washing over him. He had been unknowingly contributing to his own decline. The tiredness, the forgetfulness, it all started to make sense. His favorite fish, the ones he believed were good for his heart and brain, were full of mercury. The realization hit him hard, but now he knew what he needed to do. He needed to make a change. But it wasn't going to be easy. How would he tell his family? How could he change years of habits? But the more he thought about it, the more he understood. He wasn't just fighting for his health anymore, he was fighting for his future. Micah sat at his kitchen table, staring at his laptop screen. The sun had started to set outside, casting a warm orange glow through the windows, but he barely noticed it. His mind was consumed with the information he had just uncovered. As he read more about mercury in fish and its harmful effects, everything started to click into place. The tiredness, the forgetfulness, the brain fog, was it really the fish he had eaten all these years? For as long as Micah could remember, fish had been a staple in his diet. It was a food that symbolized health in his mind, a clean, lean source of protein that was part of his weekly routine. His wife, Janet, used to joke that he'd live forever because of all the salmon he ate. They'd even passed down the tradition to their kids, who loved when Grandpa grilled swordfish or mackerel at family gatherings. Fish was always there at the dinner table, a symbol of vitality. But now, Micah wasn't so sure. As he read through articles and research, he learned that certain types of fish he had enjoyed most, were actually high in mercury, a dangerous toxin that could accumulate over time and damage the nervous system, the brain, and even the heart. The idea that something so integral to his diet had been causing him harm left him feeling shaken. He had always trusted the nutritional value of fish, assuming it was good for his heart, his joints, and his brain, but now he was questioning everything. King mackerel was the first fish on the list that caught his attention. He'd always enjoyed it, grilling it with lemon and herbs, thinking it was doing wonders for his health. But now, as he read more about it, he realized it was one of the worst offenders when it came to mercury levels. He shook his head. No one ever told me about this. The thought of all those years of enjoying his favorite fish, unaware of the dangers lurking inside, made him feel betrayed by his own habits. The more he read, the more concerned he became. The impact of mercury on older adults was far more severe than he had imagined. As people age, their bodies become less efficient at clearing out toxins. The liver and kidneys, which work hard to filter out harmful substances, slow down over time. That meant that mercury, once ingested, could build up in the body and cause long-term damage. For someone his age, that meant he was more vulnerable to the effects of mercury. This realization hit Micah like a ton of bricks. He thought about his memory lapses, the way his hands trembled when he lifted his coffee cup some mornings. Could this be the cause? Was it possible that all these little signs of decline, the ones he had brushed off as just part of getting older, were connected to his diet? Micah knew he had to make a change, but he didn't know where to start. The fish he had eaten for so many years, fish he had always thought were a healthy choice, now seemed to be the very thing slowly eroding his health. The thought of it made him feel helpless, but he also knew one thing for sure. He couldn't ignore it any longer. He had to take control of his health. He had to be more mindful about the foods he ate, but this wouldn't be easy. Fish had been a part of his life for decades. It wasn't just about the food, it was about tradition, comfort, and memories. How could he replace something so familiar with something that felt so foreign? He decided to call Dr. Reynolds the next day. The doctor had always been his trusted advisor when it came to his health. Micah needed guidance now more than ever. After a brief chat, Dr. Reynolds confirmed what Micah had already feared. Yes, Micah, certain fish are high in mercury, and as we age, the effects of these toxins become more pronounced, the doctor explained. But you're not alone in this. Many older adults unknowingly consume fish that can be harmful. The good news is, there are safer alternatives that provide the same health benefits without the risks. Hearing Dr. Reynolds' reassuring words made Micah feel a little better, but it also made him realize just how little he knew about the foods he had been eating. He had trusted the label of healthy, assuming that fish, especially the kinds he loved, was always good for him. Now he was learning that not all fish were created equal. Dr. Reynolds suggested that Micah try incorporating wild-caught salmon, sardines, and even rainbow trout into his diet. These options were lower in mercury and rich in omega-3 fatty acids, which were essential for brain and heart health. Micah wasn't sure if he could immediately let go of his favorite types of fish, but he knew he had to make a conscious effort to try something new. He made a list of safer alternatives, determined to replace the toxic fish with healthier options. Wild-caught salmon, with its rich, buttery flavor, felt like a good place to start. It had been a while since Micah had cooked salmon at home. The last time he remembered, he had grilled it with a bit of garlic and olive oil, enjoying the tender, flaky texture with a side of steamed vegetables. That would be the first change he'd make. Micah spent the next few days researching recipes for healthier, safer fish meals. He found new ways to prepare sardines, a fish he had never considered cooking before, and discovered just how delicious they could be when prepared with a squeeze of lemon and a sprinkle of herbs. As he walked through this grocery store, Micah felt a sense of empowerment. He was no longer shopping blindly. He was becoming more informed, more intentional with the foods he put into his body. But old habits die hard. The first time he went to the seafood counter and looked at the king mackerel, it was almost like an old friend calling to him. He could already imagine the taste, the crispy skin, the rich, hearty flavor. It felt comforting, familiar. But as he stood there, he thought about the last few weeks. The research, the conversations with Dr. Reynolds, the new awareness he had gained. He shook his head, telling himself that he could no longer afford to be complacent about his health. He grabbed a pack of wild-caught salmon instead. That evening, as Micah grilled his salmon and prepared a fresh salad with greens from his garden, he felt a sense of accomplishment. This was a change, but it didn't feel like deprivation. The meal was delicious, satisfying, and full of the nutrients his body needed to stay strong. He sat down at the table, grateful for the opportunity to make a change, even if it wasn't always easy. As he took the first bite, he realized something important. It wasn't just about avoiding harmful fish. It was about taking control of his health and making smarter choices, one meal at a time. Micah didn't know what the future held, but he knew that he was doing everything he could to protect himself. The journey had just begun, and he was ready to keep moving forward, one step, one meal, one choice at a time. The days that followed Micah's decision to change his diet weren't without their challenges, but they were filled with a renewed sense of purpose. As he ventured into this new phase of his health journey, he couldn't help but reflect on just how deeply ingrained his old habits had been. Fish had always been a go-to meal in his house, something that required little thought or effort. His daughter Sarah would often ask, "Dad, what's for dinner tonight?" And he'd respond without hesitation, "Fish." It was reliable, familiar, and something they all enjoyed. But now, as he made more informed choices, he began to realize how much he had taken these familiar foods for granted. The first few meals without the familiar taste of swordfish or king mackerel felt strange. Micah found himself missing the texture and the rich flavor of the fish he had enjoyed for so long. There was a part of him that felt like he was giving up a piece of his identity, the man who always grilled the best fish at family gatherings. It wasn't just a food choice, it was part of his heritage, part of the rituals he had passed down to his children. But as he sat down to dinner with Sarah and his grandchildren one evening, he couldn't help but smile. His plate was filled with grilled wild-caught salmon, roasted vegetables, and a crisp green salad. The meal was full of color, texture, and nutrients, and more importantly, it was a step in the right direction. Sarah looked up from her plate and said, "This is really good, Dad. You're getting good at this." Micah chuckled. "I'm just learning as I go, Sarah. You know, I never realized how much I was missing by sticking to the same old meals." His voice softened as he looked at his grandchildren, playing in the living room. "You all deserve to have better, safer options too." The small change in his diet began to affect more than just his meals. It started to influence his mindset. Micah felt lighter, both physically and emotionally. He no longer felt burdened by the fear of unknown toxins slowly infiltrating his body. The more he learned, the more empowered he became. Each meal was a chance to nourish his body, to make up for the years of unconscious choices he had made. It wasn't about feeling guilty, it was about moving forward with a renewed sense of purpose and awareness. But change wasn't always easy, and Micah soon learned that it wasn't just about food, it was about a shift in mindset, a new way of looking at his health. As he continued to make healthier choices, he began to notice small but significant changes in his daily life. His energy was better. He didn't feel as fatigued after a walk around the neighborhood. He woke up more easily in the mornings, without that grogginess that used to linger, and slowly he began to notice that his memory lapses were less frequent. He could recall names, dates, and even his weekly appointments with ease. It wasn't perfect, he still had moments of forgetfulness, but the progress was undeniable. One afternoon, Micah met with Dr. Reynolds for a routine follow-up appointment. It was a simple check-in, but for Micah, it felt like a milestone. When he sat down in the examination room, he felt a sense of anticipation. He had worked hard to make changes, and now it was time to see if those changes had made a difference. Dr. Reynolds came in with a smile, his calm demeanor immediately putting Micah at ease. "Micah," the doctor said, flipping through his chart, "you're looking much better. How have you been feeling?" "Honestly, I've been feeling better than I have in a while," Micah replied, his voice filled with a mix of pride and relief. "I've been making changes to my diet, switched to safer fish, added more vegetables, and even started walking a little more each day." Dr. Reynolds nodded, his expression thoughtful. "That's excellent. And how are you feeling mentally? Any changes there?" Micah paused, considering the question. He thought about the moments when he had caught himself forgetting something or feeling overwhelmed by fatigue. They still happened from time to time, but the frequency had decreased. "You know," he said slowly, "I think my memory is improving. I'm not as foggy as I was before. My energy's better too. I feel like I'm getting back to myself." Dr. Reynolds smiled warmly. "That's fantastic to hear, Micah. The good news is that you're on the right path. We know that diet plays a significant role in brain health, and it sounds like the changes you've made are already paying off. Keep up with the healthy habits and stay proactive about your health. You're doing great." Micah left the doctor's office feeling a sense of validation. He wasn't just guessing anymore. The changes he had made had tangible, positive effects. He wasn't just surviving, he was thriving. For the first time in months, he felt confident in his ability to control his health and future. But the journey didn't end with that doctor's appointment. Micah knew there was still work to be done. His decision to avoid mercury-laden fish wasn't just about his own health, it was about his family too. He wanted to make sure they knew what he had learned so they could avoid the same mistakes. In the coming weeks, Micah found himself sharing his newfound knowledge with friends and family, explaining the risks of mercury and the importance of choosing safer fish. He wasn't preaching, he was just sharing the truth, the way he had discovered it. One afternoon, he sat down with Sarah and her husband David to have an honest conversation. "I've been doing some research on fish and its effects on health," Micah began, his voice steady but filled with urgency. "There's a lot I didn't know, and I want to make sure you and the kids are safe too." Sarah raised an eyebrow but listened intently. "What do you mean, Dad?" "I've been eating fish for years, thinking it was good for me, but I learned that some fish, especially the ones we've been eating regularly, are loaded with mercury and toxins. Those things can build up in our bodies, especially as we get older, and cause problems with our memory, our nervous system, even our hearts." Micah paused, letting the information sink in. "I don't want you or the kids to face what I've been going through. I'm changing my diet, and I think it's something you all should consider too." David nodded, his face thoughtful. "We never really looked into it. We've always heard that fish is healthy." Micah smiled gently. "That's what I thought too, but now I know better. Let's just be more mindful of the fish we eat and make safer choices for all of us." As Sarah and David agreed to make the changes, Micah felt a sense of relief. He wasn't just changing his life, he was helping protect those he loved from making the same mistakes. Together, they could build a healthier future, one meal at a time. The more Micah shared his journey, the more he realized how much he had learned. It wasn't just about the fish, it was about taking control of his health, making informed decisions, and staying ahead of the challenges that came with aging. Micah knew there would still be bumps along the way, but he also knew he was no longer in the dark. He had the power to make a difference, not only for himself, but for his family. And that was a gift he would cherish for the rest of his days. As the weeks passed, Micah began to notice more changes. They weren't drastic, not like a switch being flipped, but subtle shifts that added up over time. His morning walks had become easier, the familiar heaviness in his legs after a few steps had diminished. It wasn't just physical, it was mental too. He found himself thinking more clearly, remembering names, dates, and details without that nagging sense of forgetfulness that had begun to weigh on him. Micah realized that while he hadn't fully beaten the issues that had been plaguing him, he had made incredible progress. One evening, as Micah sat at the dinner table with Sarah and her family, he smiled to himself as he took a bite of grilled rainbow trout. He had never really paid much attention to the fish he ate before, but now every meal felt like an act of care, not just for himself, but for those around him. He noticed that his grandchildren were sitting quietly, savoring their food, and Sarah was watching him closely. Micah knew she was proud of him. He could see it in her eyes, but it wasn't just about the fish anymore. His new diet had inspired him to be more mindful in other areas of his life. Micah had always been someone who avoided exercise, despite knowing how important it was for his health. He'd spent years telling himself that his walks were enough, that he didn't need to add anything else. But now he felt the desire to do more. His body was responding to the healthier foods he was putting into it, and he wanted to strengthen it further. One morning, Micah woke up early, before the sun had fully risen. He had set a goal to add some light strength training to his routine. As he stood in his living room facing the window, he pulled out the small set of dumbbells he had bought months ago but had barely used. He wasn't expecting a major transformation in one day, but this small act, lifting those dumbbells, was symbolic. It was his commitment to his future, to his well-being, to building strength where he had once let weakness take hold. The first few days of strength training were difficult. His muscles, unused to the strain, ached in places he didn't even know existed. But even as he winced after each set, Micah knew this was part of the process. He wasn't in a race to become the strongest man in the gym. He was simply aiming to give his body the best chance it had to stay strong and capable as he grew older. One evening, after a particularly tough session of dumbbells and stretches, Micah sat down on the couch, his muscles sore but content. He found himself reflecting on his journey. What had started as a simple change in diet had turned into a holistic transformation. It wasn't just about avoiding the mercury-laden fish anymore. It was about taking a proactive stance in every aspect of his health. Diet, exercise, and most importantly, his mindset had all shifted. He had gone from feeling helpless and fearful about his future to feeling empowered and motivated. A few weeks later, Micah received a call from Dr. Reynolds for a follow-up visit. Micah had been feeling so much better that he didn't feel the same dread he had during his last appointment. He had made strides in his health, and he was eager to share his progress. When he arrived at the doctor's office, he felt confident in the changes he had made. He was ready for the doctor to validate all the hard work he had put into his health. As Dr. Reynolds walked into the room, he immediately noticed the change in Micah. He was standing taller, a subtle but undeniable shift in his posture. The man who had once seemed burdened by the weight of his age now seemed lighter, both in body and spirit. "Micah, you're looking great," Dr. Reynolds said with a smile. "How are you feeling?" "I'm feeling better than I have in a long time, Doc," Micah replied, his voice warm with relief. "I've been making some changes, not just the fish, but my whole routine. I've started exercising regularly and I feel stronger. My energy's better too." Dr. Reynolds nodded, flipping through Micah's chart. "That's exactly what I like to hear. The changes you've made with your diet are paying off. How's your memory? Any lapses or confusion?" Micah thought for a moment before answering. I haven't had as much of that brain fog. I've been able to keep up with things better, and I'm not forgetting simple tasks like I used to. It's still a work in progress, but it's better." "That's fantastic," Dr. Reynolds said, his face lighting up. "You're on the right path, Micah. By taking charge of your diet and adding exercise, you've done a lot to support your brain health and overall well-being. Keep it up." Micah felt a deep sense of satisfaction as he left the doctor's office. He wasn't cured, not by any means, but the journey he had embarked on had changed him. He no longer felt like a passive participant in his aging process. He was in control now. Every choice, every step was his own. He had empowered himself to live with intention. That evening, as Micah sat in his favorite armchair, watching the sun set outside, he reflected on everything that had happened. There was still work to be done, of course, but for the first time in months, he felt a sense of peace about his health. He was no longer consumed by fear or anxiety about the future. Instead, he was focused on what he could do right now, what he could do today to make tomorrow better. His phone rang and Micah picked it up. It was Sarah. "Hey Dad, how are you feeling?" she asked. "Better than I have in years, kiddo," he replied, a smile creeping onto his face. "I've been making some good changes." "I'm so proud of you, Dad," Sarah said. "You've really taken charge, and it's inspiring. I've started making some changes myself. We're in this together." Micah felt a surge of warmth in his chest. It wasn't just about him anymore, it was about his whole family, all of them moving forward together, making healthier choices for the long term. They were a team, and together they could face anything that came their way. As Micah looked out the window at the changing sky, he thought about the future. It wasn't guaranteed, and he knew there would be challenges ahead. But for the first time in a long time, he felt ready. He had the tools to take control of his health, and he wasn't about to let go of them. Every step he had taken was a step toward a better, brighter future. A future that was no longer defined by the fear of aging, but by the strength of his choices. As Micah continued to adjust to his new routine, he started noticing even more subtle changes in his daily life. The morning stiffness that used to grip his muscles after waking up seemed to fade a little more each day. He noticed it first when he was getting out of bed one morning. Instead of taking a few minutes to stretch before standing up, he simply stood and began his usual routine without the familiar ache. His steps felt lighter, as though a weight had been lifted from his legs. The small improvements were stacking up, and for the first time in months, he felt hopeful. Not just for his own health, but for the future. It was more than just physical changes, though. The mental clarity Micah had been hoping for was starting to take root. The forgetfulness he had been grappling with had become much less frequent. He didn't have to pause in the middle of a conversation to search for a word, nor did he struggle to recall a name or place he'd once known well. It was as though a fog had lifted from his mind and he could think with more ease. Micah's mornings were brighter, clearer, and more energetic, which helped him carry that momentum throughout the day. He couldn't help but feel a deep sense of pride in himself. This transformation hadn't been immediate, and it wasn't always easy, but it was real. It was a result of intentional decisions, small but meaningful steps to take control of his health. The dietary changes he had made, replacing high-mercury fish with safer alternatives like wild-caught salmon, sardines, and rainbow trout, had been the first domino in a chain of events that gradually transformed his physical and mental well-being. Micah had started to feel more confident in his choices. The fear that had gripped him in those early days when he had first learned about the mercury dangers in certain fish had begun to subside. As he continued down this healthier path, he found himself becoming more knowledgeable about other aspects of his diet. He learned about the importance of antioxidants and omega-3s and how the right foods could support his brain health. He was increasingly aware of how the choices he made impacted his aging body and mind, and he embraced the responsibility that came with it. One afternoon, Sarah stopped by with her 2 young children, looking for Micah to help her with a few things around the house. The grandkids had been bouncing off the walls with excitement, and Micah had promised them he'd help them build a new birdhouse. As they worked together in the backyard, Micah noticed something that made him stop for a moment. His energy level had changed so much in recent weeks that he no longer felt like he needed to take a break every 10 minutes. Instead, he was keeping up with his grandkids, laughing with them, and enjoying their enthusiasm. He realized that for a long time, he had been holding back, allowing the nagging sense of fatigue and forgetfulness to dictate his life. But now he was engaged, present, and fully able to experience the moment. As the sun began to set, Sarah pulled him aside. "Dad," she said, her voice tinged with curiosity, "you've been looking better, more energetic. I'm really proud of you. But I also see a change in your mindset. You're more, confident, health conscious?" Micah smiled, wiping his hands on his pants before he leaned against the fence. "I guess I am," he said thoughtfully. "It's funny. You start making small changes in one area of your life, and it leads to bigger changes in others. I started with my diet, replacing some of the fish I used to eat with safer options. I'm feeling stronger, thinking clearer, and even my memory's coming back. And then it wasn't just the food, I started adding exercise too. It's like it all feeds into each other." Sarah nodded, her smile growing wider. "I've noticed the difference, Dad. You're glowing." Micah chuckled, enjoying the rare moment of praise. "You know, Sarah, I've been thinking, I didn't realize just how much I was ignoring my own health. I thought I was eating right, living right, but it wasn't until I really started looking at what I was putting into my body that I realized I wasn't being as careful as I should have been." Sarah's expression softened as she placed a hand on his shoulder. "We all tend to overlook those things sometimes, but you've really turned things around. You've shown me that it's never too late to make a change. Maybe I need to start thinking more about what I'm putting on my plate too." Micah's heart swelled with pride. It wasn't just his health he had taken control of. It was his ability to inspire change in those around him. The conversation with Sarah made him realize that this journey was about more than just him. He wasn't just improving his life. He was setting an example for his children and grandchildren. The healthier choices he made could ripple out, influencing the generations that followed. He could help them avoid the same pitfalls he had unknowingly walked into. In the following weeks, Micah began to feel an increasing sense of connection to his food. Where once he had mindlessly consumed meals, now every bite felt intentional. He took the time to appreciate the nutrients he was putting into his body. He started experimenting with new vegetables, fruits, and grains, adding variety to his meals. His weekly trips to the grocery store became an opportunity to educate himself further on what was best for his body. He'd never been the type to research food labels before, but now he scrutinized every item he put into his cart. Each new choice felt like a step toward a healthier future. Micah's renewed relationship with food also led him to reconsider his approach to cooking. He began to try new recipes, searching for ways to add more wholesome, nutrient-rich ingredients into his meals. His days of relying on prepackaged, processed foods were over. Instead, he found satisfaction in preparing meals from scratch, wholesome, fresh meals that nourished his body and his soul. He even started making more plant-based dishes, learning about the power of leafy greens, beans, and whole grains to fuel his body. He found comfort in knowing that every meal, every choice, was a step toward better health. One evening, after preparing a new dish with roasted Brussels sprouts, quinoa, and wild-caught salmon, Micah sat down to dinner with Sarah and her family. As they dug into the meal, Sarah turned to him with a curious look. "Dad, you're really into this new way of eating, aren't you?" Micah grinned. "I guess I am. It's not just about food anymore, Sarah. It's about making intentional choices every day. Choices that build my future, not tear it down. And it feels good. I feel better. I feel like I'm taking back control of my life." Sarah looked down at her plate, thoughtfully chewing a bite of quinoa. "You know, I think I need to start being more intentional too. We all do." Micah smiled, his heart full. He had set out on this journey to improve his health, but now he saw that it was about so much more than that. It was about leading by example, about passing on lessons of self-care and responsibility to his family. And in doing so, he was changing not just his own life, but the lives of those he loved. He had embraced the changes, and with each passing day, he felt stronger and more confident in his ability to take control of his health. It wasn't always easy, but it was worth it. And as he looked around the dinner table at his children and grandchildren, he knew that the future they would all share, was brighter and healthier because of the choices he had made. It had been several months since Micah had made the decision to overhaul his diet and lifestyle. The changes were no longer just habits, they had become a way of life. Looking back, Micah realized how far he had come. There was a new rhythm to his days now, a sense of peace and purpose that he hadn't felt in years. He had made the transition from someone who was simply surviving to someone who was thriving, all because he had dared to ask the difficult questions about his health and take action when he had the chance. One of the most striking changes Micah had noticed was the sense of clarity that seemed to permeate every area of his life. His energy had skyrocketed. Where he had once struggled to get out of bed in the morning, he now woke up with a sense of excitement, ready to face the day. Even on the days when he had an early meeting or a long walk planned, he felt awake and energized, ready to tackle anything that came his way. And it wasn't just physical, his mental clarity had improved dramatically. The forgetfulness that used to plague him, whether it was forgetting a name, a word, or an important appointment, had almost disappeared. Micah felt like he had regained a part of himself that he had lost. But perhaps the most rewarding transformation had been the impact his journey had on his family. It wasn't just about him anymore, it was about creating a ripple effect, a chain reaction of positive changes that extended beyond his own life. Micah's kids had started to notice the difference too. Sarah had followed his lead and had started to make changes of her own, both for herself and for her children. She'd been inspired by the results Micah had seen, and as she began to change her family's eating habits, she saw the same improvements: more energy, better sleep, and a greater sense of well-being. Micah's grandkids, who had once been known for their sugar cravings, were now eating more vegetables and even enjoying the fish Micah had been cooking. He had once worried that he might not be able to inspire them to make healthy choices, but now they were beginning to follow his example without him even realizing it. They asked about the new recipes he was trying, and they often begged him to teach them how to make the meals themselves. As Micah spent time with his grandchildren, he realized that his health journey had done more than just change his own life. It had become a way to connect with his family. Whether it was cooking together, sharing meals, or talking about the importance of taking care of their bodies, Micah was able to influence those around him in ways he never imagined. He was becoming more than just a role model. He was creating a new narrative for the next generation. The lessons he had learned about self-care and responsibility were not just for him. They were for his children, his grandchildren, and perhaps even beyond that. One afternoon, Micah sat down with Sarah for a heart-to-heart conversation. They were in his kitchen, sipping coffee as they watched the kids play outside. The sun was warm, the air crisp with the promise of fall, and Micah felt at peace. It was a moment of quiet reflection, and he was grateful for it. "Dad," Sarah began, her voice filled with emotion, "I've been thinking a lot about everything you've done, how you've turned your health around. It's not just about the food, it's about how you've taken charge of your life. You're a different person now." Micah smiled, his heart full of gratitude. "I'm just getting started, Sarah. But it's been incredible to see how much can change when you really pay attention to what's going on with your body. It's not about perfection, it's about being intentional with the choices you make every day." Sarah nodded, her eyes shining. "You've shown me that. I've been thinking about the choices I've made for myself and the kids, and I've started to be more mindful about what we eat. I don't want us to go down the same path you did. I want us to live with intention, like you have." Micah placed his hand over hers, feeling a surge of pride. "You've already started making those changes, Sarah, and that's all it takes. It's not about making huge, overwhelming shifts all at once. It's about taking one small step, one meal, one choice at a time." The more Micah thought about this, the more he realized that his health journey wasn't just about avoiding toxins in his food or taking supplements or exercising more. It was about being present, about living consciously and intentionally. Every step, Every decision, no matter how small, was part of a larger picture, one that focused on long-term health, well-being, and quality of life. Micah had spent years coasting through life, assuming that his health would take care of itself as long as he ate well and stayed active. He had never considered that the choices he made might not be as good for him as he thought, but now he had a new perspective. He wasn't just living for today, he was living for tomorrow, and that small shift in mindset made all the difference. The first step in this journey had been confronting his own assumptions and understanding that he needed to change. It wasn't about denial or shame, it was about facing the truth of what was happening in his body and taking action. As Micah continued his journey, he found that each decision he made, no matter how small, became a building block for a better life. Micah also realized that in order to stay on track, he couldn't just rely on willpower. He had to make it easy on himself. That's why he kept his kitchen stocked with fresh, healthy ingredients, and he always took the time to prep his meals. He didn't let his busy schedule derail his healthy choices. And whenever he had moments of doubt, when the temptation to return to his old habits crept in, he reminded himself of how far he had come and why he had started this journey in the first place. In the evenings after dinner, Micah would sit with his family, enjoying the warmth of the moment. They talked about their days, shared stories, and laughed together. There was something deeply fulfilling about knowing that his efforts had brought his family closer, not just physically, but emotionally as well. Micah's journey had become more than just a path toward personal health. It was a journey of connection, growth, and love. And while he knew there would still be challenges ahead, both for him and for his family, he also knew that he was no longer facing them alone. With every step forward, he was bringing the people he loved along with him, guiding them toward a healthier, more intentional life. As Micah sat in his favorite armchair that evening, watching the lights of the neighborhood twinkle outside, he couldn't help but feel grateful. He had found a new sense of purpose, not just in his own health, but in his role as a father, grandfather, and guide. And with each passing day, he knew he was giving himself and his family a gift. The gift of health, the gift of time, and the gift of a future that, while never guaranteed, was something worth fighting for. As the months went by, Micah began to feel more at home in his new routine. His confidence had grown not just in his physical ability to keep up with his health, but in his emotional resilience as well. It wasn't just about the food anymore, it was about the way he approached life, the mindset he had adopted. The small decisions he made every day to prioritize his health were no longer a chore, but a source of pride. He'd learned that it wasn't about making drastic, all-or-nothing changes, but about taking one step at a time. One evening after dinner, Micah sat on the porch with Sarah, watching the last light of day disappear over the horizon. The summer air was warm, and the smell of freshly cut grass lingered in the evening breeze. Sarah leaned back in her chair, a contented smile on her face. "You've really turned things around, Dad," she said, her voice soft but filled with admiration. "I can't tell you how proud I am of you." Micah smiled, feeling a warmth in his chest. He had heard those words before, but they carried a deeper meaning now. He had always prided himself on being a good father, a good role model, but now he realized that his own journey toward better health was teaching his family something far more valuable than he had ever expected. It wasn't just about eating right or exercising, it was about the power of taking control of your own life, regardless of age or circumstance. "I appreciate that, Sarah. I really do," Micah said, his voice filled with gratitude. "But you know, I couldn't have done it without the support from you and the family. That's what really makes the difference." Sarah nodded thoughtfully. "I've seen the way you've inspired all of us. It's not just the food, it's how you've approached this whole journey. You've shown us that it's never too late to change, that it's never too late to take charge." Micah leaned back in his chair, looking up at the stars beginning to twinkle in the sky. He thought back to the days when he had first started this journey, when everything seemed uncertain and the fear of the unknown had weighed heavily on him. But now he was surrounded by the people he loved, and they were all on this journey together. It was no longer just about his own health, it was about creating a legacy of wellness for the generations that came after him. Over the past few months, Micah had also started seeing his grandkids in a different light. They had always been a source of joy for him, but now, as he watched them grow, he felt an even deeper sense of responsibility to set a positive example for them. He wasn't just concerned about the food they ate, it was about teaching them the importance of self-care, of paying attention to their bodies, of making choices that would support their future health. Micah knew that the lessons he was passing down weren't just about avoiding certain foods, they were about creating a mindset of health and well-being that would stay with them for the rest of their lives. One afternoon, Micah was in the kitchen with his granddaughter, Emma, who was just 10 years old. She had always been curious about the meals he cooked, often asking questions about how he prepared things and why certain foods were healthier than others. Today, Micah was preparing a simple vegetable stir-fry with quinoa, a dish he had made many times. He looked over at Emma, who was sitting on the counter, watching him intently. "Grandpa, why do you always eat these kinds of foods now? I mean, you used to eat a lot of fish, right?" she asked, her voice filled with innocent curiosity. Micah smiled, placing a handful of broccoli into the pan. "You're right, Emma. I used to eat a lot of fish, especially the ones we thought were healthy. But I learned something important. Some types of fish have a lot of mercury in them, and that can be harmful, especially for older people like me. I started making different choices to take care of myself." Emma frowned, her young mind processing the information. "So, is fish bad for you?" "Well, not all fish," Micah said gently. "Some fish, like wild-caught salmon, are really good for you. They give you healthy fats for your heart and brain, but others, like swordfish and king mackerel, have too much mercury. It's important to know which ones to eat and which ones to avoid." Emma nodded, taking in the information with the seriousness of someone far older than her years. "So, you're eating healthier now, right?" "That's right," Micah said, turning the pan so the vegetables cooked evenly. "I've learned that being healthy isn't just about eating the right food. It's about making smart choices and taking care of your body. And when we take care of ourselves, we can be there for the people we love." Emma smiled, her face lighting up with understanding. "I want to be healthy too, Grandpa. I'm going to eat more vegetables and do what you do." Micah's heart swelled with pride. This was exactly why he had made the changes he had. He didn't just want to feel better for himself. He wanted to pass on those lessons to the younger generation. He wanted to ensure that his grandkids would grow up with a strong foundation of health that would carry them through their own lives. As the days passed, Micah's journey continued to evolve. His daily routines had become second nature to him. He no longer felt tempted by unhealthy foods, and he no longer feared the potential risks that came with ignoring his health. He had taken back control of his life, and that control had extended to every aspect of his world, from the meals he prepared to the time he spent with his family, to the way he viewed his future. Micah's relationship with food had transformed as well. It wasn't just about eating to fill his stomach anymore. It was about nourishing his body and mind. Every meal, every choice became an opportunity to support his well-being. He was no longer a passive participant in his health. He was an active creator of his future. One evening, after a dinner of quinoa, roasted vegetables, and wild-caught salmon, Micah sat down with Sarah and her family once more. They were enjoying dessert, fresh fruit topped with a dollop of Greek yogurt, and reflecting on the journey they had all been a part of. Micah felt a deep sense of gratitude. Not only had he transformed his own health, but he had inspired those he loved to make changes too. As Sarah looked at her dad, she said softly, "You've taught me more than just how to eat healthy, Dad. You've shown me what it means to live with intention, to make choices that are good for us, not just today, but for the rest of our lives." Micah's eyes filled with tears, but he smiled through them. "We're in this together, Sarah, and that's what makes it all worthwhile." In that moment, Micah realized that the transformation wasn't just about him, it was about the way his health journey had woven itself into the fabric of his family's story. He had set the example not just through words, but through action, and in doing so, he had built a legacy of health that would continue to grow for generations to come. Micah's life was becoming a series of small victories, each one built on the foundation of a decision he made months ago to take control of his health. As he continued with his daily routine of eating healthy, exercising, and learning more about nutrition, he felt a growing sense of empowerment. He wasn't just living in a reactionary way anymore, but taking a proactive stance toward his future. For the first time in a long time, he felt like he was fully participating in his own life, and he had no plans of slowing down. One evening, as Micah was preparing dinner, he heard the familiar sound of Sarah's car pulling into the driveway. He looked out the window and saw her and her husband, David, step out, with the grandkids running toward the house, eager for their usual visit. Micah felt a smile tug at his lips. The dinner table had always been a place of connection, but now it was where they could all share in the fruits of his labor. not just in terms of food, but in terms of the health journey they were all on together. As they gathered around the table, Micah noticed that things felt different. There was a new energy in the air, lighter, more vibrant. His family was beginning to understand the importance of the choices they made for their health, and it showed in the way they now approached meals. They weren't just sitting down to eat, they were sitting down to nourish themselves, to share something meaningful. "You've been looking great, Dad," Sarah said as she passed the salad bowl. "I can tell you've really committed to this new lifestyle." Micah nodded, his smile genuine but humble. "I have. And you know, it's been a lot easier than I thought. Once you start making small changes and feel the results, it kind of becomes second nature," David chimed in. "I've noticed it too. I've been making some changes as well. No more processed junk for me. I'm following your lead with the fish too. Wild-caught salmon has become a staple for us." Micah's heart warmed as he heard David's words. He had always hoped that his efforts would inspire those closest to him, but to hear it from David, someone who had always been a little skeptical about health fads, meant more than he could put into words. It was proof that the changes Micah had made weren't just for his benefit, they were starting to affect everyone around him. The ripple effect had begun. As they all dug into the meal, Micah couldn't help but reflect on the journey he had been on. When he first learned about the dangers of mercury in fish and the toll it was taking on his body, he had felt isolated, unsure of what to do next. It had taken everything within him to confront the truth and start making changes. But now, as he looked around the table at his family, Sarah, David, the grandkids, he realized that his journey had led to something far more meaningful than just his own health. His transformation had sparked a conversation, one that had brought his family together in a way that Micah hadn't anticipated. The conversation at the table flowed effortlessly, filled with laughter, updates, and shared memories. But beneath it all, Micah knew that this wasn't just any meal, it was a symbol of something much larger. It was a reminder that health wasn't just an individual pursuit, it was a collective effort. The choices he made weren't just about him, they were about setting an example for those he loved and giving them the tools they needed to make healthier choices in their own lives. After dinner, as the grandkids played in the yard, Micah pulled Sarah aside for a quiet moment. She looked at him expectantly, her eyes filled with both pride and curiosity. "Dad," she said, "I've been thinking. You've really changed our whole perspective on health. I've started making more intentional choices for myself, and I see the difference. But I also see the difference in the kids. They're eating more vegetables now, and they're starting to understand why it matters." Micah smiled warmly, his heart swelling with pride. "I'm glad to hear that, Sarah. You know, it's not just about eating the right foods, it's about living with intention. Every choice we make impacts the rest of our lives. I want you to teach the kids the same thing. It's not just about nutrition either. It's about how we approach our health as a whole. It's about being present in our bodies and making sure we take care of them." Sarah nodded thoughtfully. "You're right. And I think we've all learned that health is about more than just food. It's about a mindset. You've shown us how to approach it with purpose." Micah's heart warmed at her words. "It's been a journey for all of us, Sarah. I'm just glad I can be a part of it. If I can help guide you and the kids toward healthier choices, then I've done what I set out to do." The conversation lingered in Micah's mind long after Sarah and her family had left for the evening. He had spent so many years taking his health for granted, assuming that as long as he ate well and stayed active, he'd be fine. But now he realized that true health wasn't just about what you ate, it was about how you lived. It was about making conscious, deliberate choices every single day, whether it was the food you put in your body, the way you moved, or how you cared for your mental and emotional well-being. And it was about sharing that knowledge with the people you loved so they could live their best lives too. Micah knew there would still be challenges ahead. No one's health journey was without its ups and downs, and there would be days when he stumbled, when he didn't feel like making the right choices. But he also knew that he had the tools and the mindset to bounce back, to make adjustments, and to keep going. He wasn't just doing this for himself anymore, he was doing it for the people he loved, for his family, for the future. And that thought brought him peace. As the evening wore on, Micah reflected on the power of small choices. The decision to change his diet, to pay closer attention to the foods he ate, had been the catalyst. But it wasn't just about the food, it was about the mindset that came with it. Every small choice had led to a transformation not just in his body, but in his outlook on life. He had chosen to take control, to embrace change, and to create a healthier future for himself and for his family. He looked out at the quiet night sky, feeling a deep sense of gratitude. He had taken control of his health, and in doing so, he had created a legacy of wellness that would ripple through the generations. And that was the greatest gift he could have ever hoped to give. The months had passed, and Micah's transformation was no longer a story of gradual improvement. It was now a part of his everyday life. He had made lasting changes to his diet, his exercise routine, and most importantly, his mindset. What had begun as an uncertain journey had blossomed into a lifestyle, one that wasn't just about avoiding harmful fish or adopting a new exercise plan. It was about living with intention, day after day. But even as he settled into his new rhythm, Micah knew that health wasn't something you could simply achieve and then forget. It was an ongoing process, a commitment that required constant attention, learning, and adjustment. There was no finish line. Health was about making the best choices you could today and tomorrow, and continuing to evolve as you went. For Micah, this journey had opened his eyes to the importance of the small, everyday decisions. He had started to see the power in every choice he made, from what he ate to how he moved, and even how he interacted with others. Health wasn't just physical, it was emotional, mental, and even social. The decisions he made affected more than just his body. They affected the way he saw the world, and the way the world saw him. One evening, after a long walk through the neighborhood, Micah sat down on his porch, the warm air settling around him. The crickets were chirping, and the sound of laughter echoed in the distance from a nearby house. He closed his eyes, letting the peaceful evening wash over him. It had been a beautiful day, one of many like it in recent months. He'd gone for his walk, eaten a balanced lunch of grilled vegetables and quinoa, and spent time with his family. It was the kind of day he hadn't fully appreciated before, simple, peaceful, but rich with meaning. The changes Micah had made weren't just about the food he ate or the exercise he did. They were about taking back control over his life. For too long, he had let things slip. He had assumed that health was something that just happened. But as he'd learned, health was an active pursuit. It wasn't something that could be left to chance. It was something you had to invest in every single day. Over the months, he had become more involved in his own health decisions. He researched the foods he ate, asked questions when he went to the doctor, and made sure that every choice was intentional. He wasn't just a passive participant anymore. He had taken an active role in his health, and the results spoke for themselves. As he sat on the porch, Micah thought back to the early days of his journey, when he had first realized that the fish he loved, the ones he'd always considered healthy, could actually be doing him harm. He remembered the shock he felt when he first read about mercury and its effects on the brain and body. He had been scared, uncertain about what to do next. But in that fear, he had found something valuable, a sense of purpose. That fear had driven him to learn more, to make changes, and to share what he had learned with others. It had been the spark that set his transformation in motion. Micah wasn't just a different man physically, he was different in every way. His family had noticed it too. They commented on how much energy he had, how much more engaged he was. Even his grandkids had started to pick up on his habits, asking him for more vegetables, helping him prepare meals, and asking questions about what he was eating and why. The cycle of good health had become self-perpetuating. As he made better choices for himself, those around him began to make better choices as well. The impact wasn't just on him, it was on everyone he cared about. But the journey was far from over. As Micah knew, there would always be new challenges, new hurdles to overcome. Aging was a fact of life, and the body didn't stay the same forever. But Micah had come to understand something crucial. Health wasn't about perfection. It wasn't about achieving some ideal state of wellness and then stopping. It was about a continuous commitment to doing the best you could with the resources available to you. Every meal, every walk, every moment of rest, it all contributed to the larger picture of health. And while there would always be challenges, Micah knew that he was better equipped than ever to face them. One morning, as Micah was preparing breakfast, scrambled eggs with spinach, avocado, and a side of fresh fruit, he received a phone call from Dr. Reynolds. He had been expecting the call, knowing it was time for his regular checkup. The results had come in, and Micah's heart began to race as he waited for Dr. Reynolds to speak. "Micah," Dr. Reynolds began, "I have to say, I'm impressed. The tests show that your health has improved across the board. Your blood pressure is lower, your cholesterol is in a healthier range, and most importantly, your cognitive function is much stronger. Whatever changes you've made, they're clearly working. Micah could hardly believe it. He had worked so hard, and now, to hear those words from his doctor felt like a validation of everything he had done. "Thank you, Dr. Reynolds," Micah said, his voice filled with emotion. "It means a lot to hear that. I've been making changes, diet, exercise, just living with more intention, and it feels good to know it's paying off." "You've done more than just change your diet, Micah," Dr. Reynolds said. "You've embraced a new way of thinking about your health. It's that mindset shift that's made all the difference. Keep it up. You've got this." As Micah hung up the phone, he sat there for a moment, taking it all in. The feeling of accomplishment was overwhelming, but more than that, it was a sense of peace. He wasn't done yet. He would always have to keep learning, keep adapting. But for the first time in a long time, he didn't feel afraid. He didn't feel lost or uncertain. He felt confident, strong, and ready to face whatever came next. Later that day, Sarah and her family came over for dinner. Micah had prepared a simple meal of roasted vegetables, quinoa, and grilled salmon, and as they sat around the table, laughing and sharing stories, Micah couldn't help but feel an overwhelming sense of gratitude. This journey hadn't just been about him, it had been about his family, his future, and the legacy of health he was building for the generations to come. As they finished their meal, Sarah leaned across the table, her eyes shining. "Dad, I can see it now. You've changed, but you've changed all of us. We're all better for it." Micah smiled, feeling the weight of those words. "We're in this together, Sarah. It's not just about one person, it's about all of us, making better choices, living better lives." With that, Micah knew that this wasn't the end of his journey, it was just the beginning. Every small step he had taken, every choice he had made, had led him to this point. And as he looked around the table at his family, he knew that the future was bright. As the weeks passed, Micah felt an increasing sense of purpose in every aspect of his life. He had set out on a journey of personal health transformation, but it had turned into something far bigger. It wasn't just about him anymore, it was about the entire legacy of well-being he was building for his children, grandchildren, and anyone who came into his life. His journey had sparked a wave of change not only within himself, but also in his family, and the ripple effect was more powerful than he had ever imagined. One of the most unexpected joys came from watching his grandkids start to embrace healthier habits. Micah had never been someone to push his lifestyle onto others, but there was something different now. His transformation had inspired curiosity, and it wasn't just about the meals, it was the way he approached life. He showed them that health wasn't just about eating right or going to the gym, it was about being mindful of what you put into your body, and more importantly, how you treated it. The lessons Micah had learned were now being passed down to his grandchildren in ways he hadn't anticipated. He remembered a Sunday afternoon a few weeks ago when he'd been preparing a batch of homemade vegetable soup. The smell of the vegetables simmering on the stove had filled the house, and the warmth of the soup was comforting against the chill in the air. His oldest grandson, Ethan, came into the kitchen, drawn by the smell. "What's cooking, Grandpa?" Ethan asked, peering into the pot. "Vegetable soup," Micah replied with a smile. "It's one of my favorites. It's full of good stuff. Carrots, beans, onions, garlic, spinach. It's the kind of food that makes you feel good inside." Ethan's brow furrowed as he watched his grandfather stir the soup. "But Grandpa, doesn't that make you weak? It's not like candy or chips. How come you eat stuff like this?" Micah chuckled softly. "Ethan, this is the kind of food that makes you strong. You see, our bodies need things like vitamins, minerals, and fiber to stay healthy. These foods help keep our hearts, muscles, and brains in good shape." Ethan still seemed skeptical, but Micah's words planted a seed in his mind. Over time, he started asking more questions about food. He wanted to know why certain things were healthy and others weren't. He began picking out fruits and vegetables when they went grocery shopping, and Micah was more than happy to teach him the importance of eating the rainbow. As the weeks passed, Micah noticed Ethan asking for vegetables at dinner without being prompted, even reaching for a salad instead of his usual bowl of chips. Micah's heart swelled with pride as he watched the next generation begin to internalize what he had learned. It wasn't just about food, it was about the principles of health, and Ethan was starting to live them out in his own way. Micah realized that in making these changes, he was creating a legacy. He wasn't just changing his own life, he was changing the way his family thought about health, setting them on a path toward a better future. But it wasn't just the kids. Micah's relationship with Sarah had deepened in ways he hadn't expected. She had always been supportive of him, but now they found themselves having deeper conversations about health and lifestyle choices. They talked more about the importance of preventative care, the risks of aging, and how the choices we made today could influence our tomorrow. They didn't just share recipes, they shared experiences and concerns. One evening, as Sarah helped him prepare dinner, she turned to him, her face serious. "Dad," she said, "I've been thinking about the way I eat. I've been doing better since you started making changes, but I still slip up. I'm worried I'm not setting the best example for the kids." Micah looked at her with understanding. "It's a journey, Sarah. None of us are perfect. You've made incredible changes already, and that's something to be proud of. It's not about being perfect. It's about making better choices every day. We're all doing our best." Sarah smiled, a sense of relief washing over her. "You're right. I'm proud of what I've done so far. But hearing you say that makes me realize it's okay to be human. We don't have to be perfect. We just have to keep trying." Micah nodded. "Exactly. And you're already giving them so much more than I ever had. Awareness, knowledge, and the tools to live a healthy life." That conversation marked a shift in their dynamic. Micah wasn't just the one learning, they were learning together, sharing what they had discovered, supporting each other in their efforts to live healthier, more intentional lives. It was no longer about just one person making changes, it was about the entire family being a part of this movement toward health. One of the most significant changes Micah had made was to his own mindset. He had always been somewhat passive about his health, relying on the assumption that he'd be fine as long as he ate well and stayed active. But now, he knew better. He had taken an active role in his health, learning about the foods he was eating, the way his body responded to them, and how the choices he made every day impacted his future. It was no longer about waiting for things to happen. It was about making sure the future he envisioned was one that aligned with his current actions. Micah's relationship with food had changed entirely. It was no longer about filling himself up or eating out of habit. It was about nourishment, about fueling his body with the nutrients it needed to thrive. He had become more connected to his meals, preparing them with care and intention. There was a deep satisfaction in knowing that every meal was a step toward maintaining his health for the long term. As he continued to evolve in his journey, Micah knew that health wasn't just a destination. It was a continuous journey. It wasn't about achieving a specific weight or hitting a particular milestone. It was about embracing the process, making small adjustments along the way, and staying engaged with his well-being. It wasn't always easy, and there were times when he slipped up, but he never let those moments define him. He had built a foundation, a routine that he could always return to, and that gave him peace of mind. Micah was no longer the man who feared the aging process. Instead, he was the man who welcomed it, knowing that with the right choices, the future could be bright. He had learned that health wasn't something you passively waited for, it was something you actively built, one decision at a time. As he sat at the dinner table, surrounded by the people he loved, Micah couldn't help but feel grateful. His health journey had transformed his life in ways he never expected. It had brought him closer to his family, taught him about the power of small, intentional choices, and given him the opportunity to leave a legacy of health that would benefit generations to come. And in that moment, he knew that the journey wasn't over. It was only just beginning. As Micah's transformation continued, he found that the initial excitement of change was beginning to settle into something deeper, more stable. It wasn't just the novelty of eating healthier or the thrill of feeling better. It was the realization that he had reshaped his life in ways that would last. He had shifted his mindset, adjusted his habits, and become more mindful of every choice he made. Now it was more about maintaining and building upon these changes than about the struggle to change in the first place. What struck him the most was how much his approach to health had evolved. It used to be that Micah's definition of health was largely based on external appearances, how much he weighed, how strong he felt physically, and how active he could be. But over time, as he learned more about nutrition, aging, and self-care, his definition began to change. Health wasn't just about looking good or staying active. It was about being in tune with his body and understanding how the choices he made affected his mind, his energy, and his overall well-being. One of the biggest adjustments for Micah was the emotional shift he'd undergone. When he had first started on this journey, he'd been motivated by fear, the fear that he was losing control over his health, the fear that he was getting older and slipping into the decline that often accompanies it. But now, that fear had transformed into something else. Empowerment. The more he learned, the more confident he became. He realized that no matter how old he was, he had the power to take control of his health, to make choices that supported his future rather than diminishing it. His journey had taught him that small, consistent actions were more powerful than occasional grand efforts. A good walk here, a healthy meal there, a few mindful choices every day, it all added up. He no longer focused on drastic changes, but on sustainable habits that would serve him in the long term. The quick fixes were out, and the steady, manageable shifts were in. One day, Micah sat down to breakfast with his granddaughter, Emma. She was now 12, and over the last few months, he had noticed a subtle but significant shift in her approach to food. She had become more interested in what he was eating and why, asking questions about the ingredients, how he prepared his meals, and what kind of health benefits each item offered. Micah had always believed that the lessons he had learned about health were valuable, but now he was beginning to realize just how deeply these lessons could be passed down to the next generation. "Grandpa," Emma said, taking a bite of her oatmeal, "I've been thinking a lot about the foods we eat. I want to make sure I eat better, like you do. I mean, I don't want to be like the people who get sick all the time because of what they eat." Micah looked at her, surprised but proud. "That's a very wise thought, Emma. The choices we make today affect the way we feel tomorrow and the way we age. You're already ahead of the game by thinking this way." Emma nodded, her eyes serious. "I want to eat better, exercise more, and feel strong. I want to make sure I'm taking care of myself, like you're doing now." Micah smiled, feeling a surge of pride. "You're already doing it, Emma. The fact that you're thinking about it now at your age is a gift. The earlier you start, the easier it is to make good habits stick." As they sat together, enjoying their breakfast and chatting about different ways to stay healthy, Micah realized that the knowledge he had gained, the lifestyle changes he had made, were having an impact on the next generation. Emma wasn't just hearing him talk about health, she was actively absorbing the lessons he was sharing, and she was beginning to put them into practice in her own life. It was a moment of realization for Micah. His journey wasn't just about changing his own life, it was about creating a ripple effect that would continue to spread for years to come. His health journey wasn't just his own anymore. It had become a family-wide movement, a shared effort to prioritize well-being and make mindful choices every day. That afternoon, as Micah went on his daily walk, he thought about how much had changed. The neighborhood was quiet, and he could feel the cool breeze brushing against his skin. His walk was a time for reflection, a time to check in with himself and take stock of where he was in his journey. He marveled at how far he had come from those early days when he had felt lost and uncertain. He thought back to when he first began researching fish and learned about the dangers of mercury. He remembered how overwhelmed he had felt by the wealth of information and how, for a while, he hadn't known where to begin. But now, everything was different. He was no longer overwhelmed by information. He had integrated it into his life, piece by piece. He had found a rhythm, a balance, and he had made it work for him. Walking had become a metaphor for his journey, slow, steady, and forward-moving. It wasn't about sprinting to some destination, but about the consistency and determination to keep moving, no matter what obstacles appeared along the way. When Micah returned home, he sat down in his favorite chair by the window, enjoying the warmth of the afternoon sun as it poured into the room. He looked around at his life and felt a sense of peace. The changes he had made were significant, but more than that, they had given him the clarity to appreciate what he had. He wasn't just alive, he was living. His energy, his focus, his joy had returned, and he was now fully present in his life. The phone rang, interrupting his thoughts. It was Sarah. "Hey, Dad," she said. "I just wanted to check in and tell you something. We've been talking as a family, and we're all committed to doing better. I'm making it a goal to cook healthier meals, and we're going to do a weekly family workout. The kids are really on board, and we're excited to get started." Micah's heart swelled with pride. "That sounds incredible, Sarah. I'm so happy to hear that. You're making great choices for your family, and I'm proud of all of you. It's amazing to see how far we've come." "You've been the one to lead us, Dad," Sarah said. "You've changed our whole approach to health, and it's making a huge difference. We're all in this together." Micah felt a tear slip down his cheek, but it was a tear of gratitude. For so long, he had felt like he was alone in his health struggles, but now he realized that he had created a network of support, a community of family members who were all committed to the same goal. And the best part was that the journey was ongoing. There was no end point. It was a continuous, evolving process of learning, growing, and living well. As Micah sat in his chair, surrounded by the quiet hum of his home, he realized that this wasn't just about food or exercise. It was about taking care of the life he had been given and sharing that gift with the people he loved. He wasn't just building his own future, he was building a future for his family, for his grandchildren, and for generations to come. His journey had come full circle, and he felt a deep sense of fulfillment and peace. As the seasons changed and the years rolled by, Micah found himself reflecting on his journey more and more. There were moments when the struggles of his past seemed like a distant memory, like a fog that had cleared with time. Yet there were also moments when he felt a deep sense of appreciation for the challenges he had faced. Every obstacle, every bit of discomfort had shaped him into the person he was today, stronger, wiser, and more in tune with his body and mind than he had ever been. Micah had come to realize that his health journey was more than just a personal transformation. It was a journey of growth, not just physically, but emotionally and mentally as well. What started as an exploration into nutrition and fitness had evolved into a deeper understanding of his own purpose in life. It wasn't just about feeling good, it was about living with intention, about using his experiences to help others and to pass down the wisdom he had gained. His experiences had shaped him into a living example of resilience, and now he could share that example with his family, his community, and anyone who needed guidance on their own health journey. One morning, Micah sat with his cup of coffee, watching the sunlight filter through the trees outside. The house was quiet, but it wasn't the solitude he once found comforting. It was the sense of peace that came from knowing that he was exactly where he needed to be. In the past, he had been consumed by worries about his health, afraid of aging, afraid of losing his mental sharpness, afraid of what was to come. But now he realized that the only thing he had control over was how he lived today. The choices he made, what he ate, how he moved, how he cared for his body, were the only things that truly mattered. His daughter Sarah had called the other day to tell him how much of an impact his journey had made on their family. She spoke about how much more active the kids had become, how they had all started to enjoy cooking healthy meals together, and how, as a family, they were more conscious of their health than ever before. Micah smiled as he remembered their last family gathering, where they had all gathered around the dinner table, laughing and talking about the changes they had made, the new foods they had discovered, and the positive effects those changes had brought into their lives. The ripple effect of his journey had been more profound than he had imagined. It had started with a simple desire to take better care of himself, but now it had evolved into a family-wide commitment to health. And Micah couldn't be prouder. He had always hoped to leave a legacy of love, but now it seemed that his legacy would also be one of health. A legacy that would continue to shape his family for generations to come. One afternoon, while tending to his garden, Micah was joined by Emma, his youngest granddaughter. She had grown a lot in the past year, and Micah couldn't help but notice how mature she was becoming. She was asking more questions, taking a genuine interest in the world around her, and Micah couldn't help but feel a deep sense of pride. She had become more involved in their family's new approach to health, helping prepare meals, asking about the different vegetables they were growing, and even beginning to research healthy snacks for herself and her friends. "Grandpa, I've been thinking," Emma said as she squatted beside him, watching him plant new herbs. "You've taught me so much about eating healthy. I want to help my friends at school learn about it too. They're always eating junk food, and I want them to know that they can feel better if they eat the right stuff." Micah looked at her, surprised by her words. "That's a wonderful idea, Emma. You can be a great example for them. You've already started by learning about good food and how it can help you stay strong. Sharing what you know with your friends will help them make better choices too." Emma's eyes lit up as she smiled. "I think it'll make a big difference. My friends always ask why I'm not tired after school or why I don't get sick as much. I think it's because of what you've taught me." Micah placed his hand on her shoulder, feeling a deep sense of joy. "You're learning something important, Emma. You're learning how to take care of yourself. And when you take care of yourself, you can be there for others. Just like we've been doing in this family, it's all about the small choices. Each day, each meal, each step you take toward being healthy, it adds up." Emma nodded thoughtfully. "I want to be like you, Grandpa. I want to live a long, healthy life, just like you." Micah's heart swelled with pride. He had never expected his journey to affect his family in this way, but as he looked at Emma, he realized just how far-reaching the impact had been. He had started this journey thinking about his own health, but now it was something much bigger. He was teaching his family the value of health, the importance of taking care of their bodies, and how to pass that knowledge down to others. Later that week, Micah found himself in the kitchen, preparing dinner as usual. As he sliced vegetables for a stir-fry, he thought about how his journey had transformed the way he viewed food. What had once been a simple task, something to do when he was hungry, was now a ritual, a practice of self-care. Every ingredient he chopped, every meal he prepared, was an opportunity to nurture his body and mind. He had learned to appreciate the process of cooking, of selecting fresh ingredients, and of crafting meals that supported his health. As Micah continued to experiment with new dishes, he found himself growing more and more excited about the possibilities. He no longer felt limited by the same old meals he had cooked for years. Instead, he was exploring new flavors, discovering new foods, and becoming more adventurous in the kitchen. Each meal was a chance to try something new, to add more nutrients to his diet, and to continue supporting his body's needs. But it wasn't just the cooking that had changed. His entire approach to food had evolved. He had learned that food wasn't just fuel, it was medicine. The right foods could heal, restore, and energize. The wrong foods could do just the opposite. And in learning this, Micah had unlocked a new level of understanding about how his body worked and how to keep it functioning at its best. Micah's relationship with food had become more conscious, more intentional. He was no longer eating out of habit or convenience. Every meal was a choice, a decision to nourish his body and provide it with the nutrients it needed to thrive. It was a daily commitment to himself, a promise to continue making the best choices he could, not just for himself, but for his family as well. The more Micah embraced this new way of thinking, the more he realized that his health journey was never just about physical well-being. It was about creating a deeper connection with himself, with his family, and with the world around him. It was about living with purpose, making decisions that aligned with his values, and fostering a sense of mindfulness in everything he did. Micah's story was no longer just his own. It had become a collective story, one that was shaping the lives of his loved ones, creating a ripple effect that would continue long after he was gone. And as he stood in his kitchen, looking around at the family photos on the wall and the empty chairs at the table, Micah knew that he had left behind something far greater than just a healthy lifestyle. He had left behind a legacy, one of love, intention, and care, that would continue to shape generations to come. As the days passed and the years slowly added to Micah's life, he couldn't help but marvel at how far he had come. There were moments of doubt, of course, and times when he felt like giving up. But those moments were now few and far between. The decisions he had made, the lifestyle he had adopted, had become so ingrained in his daily life that they were no longer a struggle. They were simply who he was. Micah's family continued to be his greatest source of support, but it wasn't just about his own health anymore. It was about creating a culture of health, one that permeated every aspect of his life. He had seen firsthand how small changes could lead to big results, not only for him, but for his children, grandchildren, and even friends. What started as a personal journey had become a shared experience, one that was changing the way his entire family viewed health, food, and wellness. Micah thought about the conversations he had with Sarah and the kids. Every time they gathered around the table, they shared not only meals, but also their progress, their struggles, and their victories. There was no judgment, just encouragement. Micah's approach to health had never been about perfection or rigid rules. It was about making choices that supported the body, mind, and spirit. He had learned that health wasn't a destination, it was a way of living. And the more he embraced this philosophy, the more it made sense. One evening, as Micah sat in his favorite armchair, reflecting on the past, his mind wandered back to those early days when he had been faced with the uncomfortable truth about the mercury in the fish he'd been eating. The fear had been overwhelming at first, and he had been unsure where to start, but now it seemed like a distant memory. He had faced the unknown and had come out on the other side stronger and more informed. It had been a journey of discovery, not just about food, but about life itself. Micah had learned that making informed choices was one of the most powerful tools anyone could possess. It wasn't just about following a trend or making a quick fix. It was about understanding the long-term consequences of the decisions you made and choosing the path that led to lasting health and well-being. And with that knowledge, he had not only transformed his life, but also the lives of those around him. His thoughts were interrupted when Sarah called him, a familiar voice on the other end. "Hey Dad, I've been thinking," she said, her tone excited. "I've been talking to the kids, and we've decided to make a big change as a family. We're going to start meal prepping together on Sundays, getting the whole week's meals ready so we don't fall back into bad habits." Micah smiled, his heart full of pride. "That sounds amazing, Sarah. I'm so proud of all of you. You've all really embraced this new lifestyle." "It's all because of you, Dad," Sarah replied, her voice tinged with gratitude. "We've seen the difference it's made in your life, and we want that for ourselves too. We're all in this together." The conversation with Sarah left Micah with a deep sense of contentment. He had always hoped to leave behind a legacy that mattered, and now he was seeing it unfold before him. The lessons he had learned, the changes he had made, were now being passed down to his children and grandchildren. The ripple effect was continuing, and it was more powerful than he had ever imagined. As Micah continued to reflect on his journey, he realized just how much his perspective had shifted. In the past, he had seen aging as something to fear. He had worried about losing his mental sharpness, his physical strength, and his independence. But now he saw aging in a new light. It was still a challenge, of course, but it was one that he could meet head on. He had learned that health wasn't about avoiding the inevitable. It was about preparing for it, making choices that supported the aging process rather than fighting against it. The idea of aging with grace and vitality was something that Micah now embraced fully. He had learned that health wasn't just a matter of luck, it was a matter of choice. The choices he made every day, whether it was what he ate, how he moved, or how he cared for his mind, all played a role in his ability to age well. And with the knowledge he had gained, he felt empowered to face whatever challenges the future might hold. One of the most gratifying aspects of Micah's journey was how it had brought his family closer together. They weren't just sharing meals, they were sharing a vision. They were working together to build a healthier, more intentional future, not just for themselves, but for the generations to come. This sense of togetherness had become a cornerstone of their family dynamic, and Micah knew it was a gift that would continue to shape their lives for years to come. That evening, as the family gathered for dinner, Micah noticed something that brought a lump to his throat. His grandchildren were sitting around the table, talking about their day, sharing stories and laughter. They were eating their vegetables, asking for seconds, and genuinely enjoying the meal in front of them. And Micah realized in that moment that this was what it was all about. It wasn't just about the food, it was about the connections, the shared experiences, and the love that had been built through these moments. He looked around the table at his family, feeling a sense of peace wash over him. They were healthier, happier, and more connected than ever before. And it was all because of the choices he had made, the changes he had embraced. Micah had started his journey thinking about his own health, but now he realized that the true reward was not just in the physical transformation. It was in the way his family had come together, the way they had supported each other in their pursuit of better health. Looking at his family, Micah felt a deep sense of pride. He wasn't just leaving behind a legacy of good health, he was leaving behind a legacy of love, of intentional living, and of the importance of taking care of one another. His journey had created a foundation of well-being that would continue to benefit his family for generations, and that, to him, was the greatest gift he could give. As he sat back in his chair, surrounded by the warmth of his family, Micah realized that health was not just something you achieved. It was something you shared. It was a gift, passed down from one generation to the next, woven into the fabric of family, love, and togetherness. And as he looked around the table at his loved ones, Micah knew that he had built something that would last far beyond his lifetime, a legacy of health, happiness, and connection that would continue to grow and thrive for years to come. The seasons continued to change, each one offering its own quiet reminder of time's steady march. Micah had spent years working to improve his health, and now, as he watched his family thrive and embrace healthier choices, he could see the fruits of his labor. His journey, which had once been about his own struggles and triumphs, had become a shared story. His health transformation wasn't just about him, it was about creating a future where his loved ones could live longer, stronger, and healthier lives. One crisp morning, as Micah prepared a breakfast of whole grain toast, scrambled eggs, and sautéed spinach, he reflected on the path that had brought him to this moment. He'd spent so many years taking his health for granted, assuming that things would just fall into place if he ate decently and stayed active. But now he saw that it was so much more than that. Health wasn't something that happened automatically. It was a constant choice, a series of intentional actions made day by day. What he had learned over the years wasn't just about avoiding toxic foods or staying active. It was about the power of mindfulness, about being present in every decision he made, and understanding that small, seemingly insignificant choices could compound into something greater over time. When he had first begun this journey, it had been a challenge to change habits that had been ingrained for so long, but now it felt effortless. It wasn't about perfection, it was about progress, and that was something Micah had learned to embrace. As he sat down to enjoy his breakfast, Micah smiled at the thought of his family. Sarah had called him just the night before to let him know that she had started a new weekly routine with the kids. Every Sunday, they were all cooking together. It had been his idea to start meal prepping and involving the family in making healthier choices, but now it was something they were doing on their own. Micah couldn't help but feel an overwhelming sense of pride and fulfillment. This wasn't just about changing his life, it was about creating a new way of living for his entire family. Micah had been witness to their transformation, especially his grandkids. The last time they had gathered for dinner, he couldn't help but notice how they were all picking at their salads and eating more vegetables without being asked. They were laughing and talking about their favorite fruits and healthy snacks, and for the first time in years, Micah realized that his grandchildren weren't just absorbing his lessons, they were starting to teach him something too. One evening, as he sat down with Emma and her older brother Luke, they asked him questions about food that made him realize just how much they were understanding the value of healthy eating. "Grandpa," Luke said, "why do we eat salmon instead of the fish we used to have? It's good, but it doesn't taste the same as swordfish." Micah smiled, setting his fork down. "You're right, Luke. The taste is different. But salmon is much better for our bodies than swordfish. It has omega-3s, which are really good for our brains and hearts. Swordfish has something called mercury in it, and that's not good for us, especially when we get older." Emma, who was now 12, nodded seriously. "So we're eating healthy fish because it helps us stay strong?" "Exactly," Micah replied, feeling a sense of pride. "The healthier the food we eat, the better we feel. And it's not just about the food, it's about making good choices in everything we do. Healthy eating is just one part of taking care of ourselves." The kids were starting to understand the bigger picture. They weren't just eating better, they were learning why these choices mattered. It wasn't about forcing them to eat vegetables or giving up their favorite treats. It was about helping them understand the impact of their choices and showing them that eating healthy wasn't a punishment. It was a privilege, a way to fuel their bodies so they could grow strong and live long lives. Later that evening, after the kids had gone home, Sarah sat down with Micah for a quiet conversation. She had been watching him for months now, taking in the changes he had made, both physically and mentally. She admired how much he had transformed, but what struck her most was how he had become a beacon of wisdom in their family. "Dad," she said softly, "you've really made a difference, not just in your life, but in ours too. You've taught us all to live with intention. I've seen the kids start asking questions about food, about health, and I know it's because of what you've shared with us. You've made health something we can all care about together." Micah smiled, his heart swelling with pride. "I'm glad you see it, Sarah, but you've done the hard work too. You've taken what I've learned and made it your own. And that's the best part. It's not about me teaching you, it's about us learning together. You're setting such a great example for your kids. I couldn't be prouder." Sarah's eyes glistened as she looked at her father. "I never thought about it like that, but you're right. I think we've all learned something along the way. We're making better choices, and we're enjoying it. The kids are excited to cook, and I'm excited to share these new habits with them." Micah sat back in his chair, savoring the moment. This wasn't just about changing his life anymore, it was about creating a family culture that valued health, well-being, and love. The lessons he had learned had become a thread that wove through each of their lives, connecting them in ways that he had never imagined. His journey had sparked something larger than he had anticipated, a movement, a shift, a way of living that they could all share. That night, as Micah lay in bed, he thought about the future. His life had been filled with challenges, with struggles, and with moments of doubt. But those moments had shaped him into who he was today, and now he had the power to shape the future, not just for himself, but for the generations that would follow. He knew there would be more obstacles ahead, but he also knew that he was better prepared to face them. The health journey he had embarked on years ago had changed everything. It had changed his body, his mind, his family, and his perspective on life. It wasn't just about eating healthy foods or avoiding certain dangers. It was about embracing a new way of living, a way that valued well-being, connection, and the wisdom that came with age. The lessons Micah had learned were now his legacy, passed down to his children and grandchildren, who would carry them forward, making their own choices and living healthier lives because of the foundation he had laid. Micah closed his eyes, content in the knowledge that the life he had worked so hard to build wasn't just about him. It was about the future. It was about the generations who would come after him, and the legacy of health, love, and intentional living that would continue for years to come. The days continued to pass in their gentle rhythm, each one filled with small, meaningful moments. Micah had grown accustomed to his new way of life, and in many ways it had become second nature. He no longer had to think twice about his meals or his exercise routine. His days were filled with purpose, and he felt a deep sense of peace that had eluded him for so many years. It wasn't about perfection anymore. It was about living intentionally, making the best choices he could each day, and supporting the ones he loved along the way. One Sunday afternoon, Micah sat on the porch of his home, watching the neighborhood bustle with activity. The sound of children playing, the rustle of leaves in the breeze, and the distant hum of conversation filled the air. He leaned back in his chair, savoring the moment. The world around him seemed at peace, and for the first time in a long time, Micah felt at peace with himself. His journey had started as a personal struggle, driven by fear of aging and the health issues that came with it. But now it had become something much greater. It wasn't just about his own health, it was about the choices he made that rippled through his family, creating a legacy of well-being that would be passed down to future generations. As he sat there, Micah thought back to the early days of his health transformation. When he first realized the dangers of mercury in fish and other toxic substances in his diet, he had felt overwhelmed. The fear of what those toxins could do to his body had been paralyzing. But it was that fear that had driven him to take action. It had forced him to educate himself, to make difficult choices, and to embrace a new way of living. And while the fear had been a powerful motivator, it was the results, the improved energy, the clearer mind, the renewed sense of vitality that kept him moving forward. His journey wasn't just about making health-conscious decisions, it was about realizing that every choice he made had a long-term impact. Each meal, each walk, each conversation, it all contributed to the larger story of his life. He had learned that true health was not just about what you put into your body, but how you treated your body, mind, and spirit. It was about balance, about making sure that everything in his life aligned with the values he held dear: health, connection, love, and intentionality. As Micah reflected on how far he had come, he realized that his own transformation had sparked a deeper change in his family. Sarah, his daughter, had been his first ally in this journey, but now she was leading the charge in her own family. Their shared commitment to health had created a bond between them, one that was stronger than ever. And it wasn't just Sarah, his grandkids too had become more mindful of their choices. They were learning from him, yes, but they were also teaching him in return, showing him new ways to be healthy, to stay active, and to live with purpose. One evening, as Sarah and her family gathered at Micah's house for dinner, he couldn't help but smile. They had all gathered around the table, Sarah, David, and the grandkids, and it felt like the most natural thing in the world. The food was simple, yet delicious. Roasted vegetables, grilled wild-caught salmon, quinoa, and a fresh green salad. Micah had always enjoyed cooking, but now every meal felt like an opportunity to connect with his family and nourish them with the same love and care he had learned to give himself. As they ate, Sarah looked at her father, her eyes filled with gratitude. "Dad, I've been thinking a lot about everything you've taught us. You've changed so much, and because of that, we've all changed. I never realized how much our health is tied to the choices we make, and now we're all on this journey together." Micah felt a surge of warmth in his chest. "I'm proud of all of you," he said, his voice steady but filled with emotion. "It's not just about the food, you know. It's about how we approach life, how we take care of ourselves and each other. You're not just following my example, you're creating your own path, and that makes me prouder than anything." The conversation shifted, and soon they were talking about their plans for the future, more walks, more family meals, and even some new fitness challenges they could do together. Micah could see how his journey had become theirs. They were no longer just living for today, they were living for the future, for their health and the health of their children and grandchildren. As the evening came to a close, Sarah leaned over and whispered to her dad, "You've given us a gift, Dad. You've shown us that health isn't just about surviving, it's about living fully. We're going to pass this on to the next generation." Micah smiled, a tear slipping down his cheek. He hadn't expected this when he first started his journey. All he had wanted was to feel better, to take care of himself. But what he had gained, what he had created, was so much more than that. He had created a legacy of health, of intentional living, and of love that would continue long after he was gone. As the years went by, Micah continued to live his life with the same purpose, the same passion, and the same commitment to his health. His family continued to grow, both in number and in health, and the lessons he had learned were passed down to his children, his grandchildren, and even to people in his community who sought his advice. His journey had started as something personal, but it had evolved into something that affected everyone he cared about. He wasn't just living for himself anymore, he was living for them, for their future, and for the legacy of health and well-being that would continue for generations. Micah had created something more than just a healthy lifestyle. He had created a blueprint for a better life, one built on the foundation of love, intentionality, and care. And in that moment, as he watched his family laugh and share stories around the dinner table, he knew that his work was far from over. His legacy was still being written, one choice at a time, and it would continue long into the future. As we followed Micah's journey from the early days of fear and uncertainty about his health to a place of strength and clarity, we've seen how small changes can lead to profound transformations. Micah began his journey by confronting the truth about the fish he ate, learning about the dangers of mercury, and realizing that health was not just about eating the right foods. It was about living with intention, making conscious choices every day. With each step he took, whether it was replacing toxic fish with healthier alternatives, embracing exercise, or learning to be mindful of his body's needs, Micah grew stronger, not just physically, but emotionally as well. His journey didn't just change his own life, it became a beacon for his family. Sarah, his children, and even his grandchildren embraced the lessons he taught them, making health a family effort and a legacy that will continue for generations. Micah's story is a reminder that it's never too late to take control of your health. The path to well-being is a series of small, intentional steps that add up over time. Whether it's making healthier food choices, staying active, or learning about the foods that nourish your body, every action you take can lead to a better, more vibrant future. To all the seniors watching, remember, health is not a destination, it's a journey. You have the power to make changes no matter your age. Your future is shaped by the choices you make today. So take a moment, reflect on your own life, and ask yourself, what small change can you make today to improve your health tomorrow? Start now, because the best time to take charge of your health is always today.